Welcome everyone. I'd like to take this moment to welcome you to this Return to Dance session. It's been wonderful sharing these webinars with you over the past few weeks. My name is Erin Sanchez and I'm the Manager of Health, Wellbeing and Performance at One Dance UK and the Manager of the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science. One Dance UK is the sector support organisation leading the way to a stronger, more vibrant and diverse dance sector. Our aim is to create a workforce that is well equipped to secure dance's prominence in the cultural landscape of the future. We do this by providing services, information, and opportunities for dance organizations, dance professionals, including dance artists, choreographers, dance teachers, educators and practitioners, dance medicine and science practitioners, dance managers and producers, all children and young people, and all parts of the dance sector. One Dance UK is also a membership organization, and if you're not already a member, then please join. Together, we're stronger. One Dance UK is also a partner in the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science, alongside Birmingham Royal Ballet, the University of Wolverhampton, the University of Birmingham, Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance, and the Royal Ballet. The National Institute works to provide the dance sector with access to high quality, affordable, dance-specific healthcare and dance science support services in private practice and the NHS. These services are underpinned by the dance medicine and science research, including that developed by the NIDM's partners. Best practice, information, and resources are disseminated to the wider dance community through health and educational workshops, conferences, and publications. Just as a reminder, public health is a devolved issue, and keep in mind that guidance for dance activities in England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales will vary. If you're planning dance activity, you should always consider whether there are local restrictions in place for your area or region, and ensuring that if you're watching these webinars on catch-up, that you've kept up to date with the most recent local restrictions in your area. Government guidance will also evolve with science, so it's key to stay up to date. Reading the government guidance is also very important for your planned work, so make sure that you've read the government guidance that relates to your activity specifically, as there are several to choose from with regard to dance. Within these webinars, we're going to aim to provide a space to discuss, raise questions, identify issues, and share practice. And also, we aim to support practical implementation of government guidance across the dance sector. If you haven't taken part in one of these webinars before, we have two options for interacting as an attendee. You can put chat, ideas, questions, feedback into the chat box. You can also type questions into the Q&A box. If you do have a question that you add to the Q&A box, we'll try to address as many questions as possible live. And all those questions that we answer live will be available in writing on One Dance UK's website after the session. You can also upvote questions you see in the Q&A box so that they move to the top of the list to be answered. The focus for today's webinar will be on physical and mental preparation for returning to dance activity, which is a key consideration as we all plan for the coming weeks and months. We will discuss aspects of nutrition and fitness in the context of the pandemic and returning to dance activity. Nutrition is a fundamental building block for healthy engagement in dance activities at any level, and it's also a key consideration for maintaining a healthy immune system. Fitness within the context of the pandemic has also been on many agendas and is no less important for professional dancers than those engaging at any other level, including community settings, dance in schools, and as an artistic or creative freelancer. Today's session will cover nutrition, including restorative nutrition after COVID, considering nutrition during lockdown and moving forward, specific supplement considerations, and managing fluids with mask wearing. From a fitness perspective, we'll be addressing the challenge of diversity in physical activities during lockdown, and balancing the desire to just dance with the need to focus on long-term goals and quality. This session also complements the webinar content from last Friday, the 7th of August, on mental health and injury management as we return to dance. You can access this session on Catch-Up via YouTube or through One.CK's website. I'd like to introduce our panel today. It includes myself as chair and also includes 2 members of our Dance Medicine and Science expert panel. Jasmine Chalice has an honors degree in nutrition, a postgraduate diploma in dietetics from the University of London, and is currently undertaking an MRes in sport and exercise science at the University of Roehampton, which actually I believe now she's completed. She's registered as a dietitian with the Healthcare Professionals Council. She's an accredited nutritionist and a high performance registrant on the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register. Jasmine has a particular interest in dance, working with dance students, teachers, and professionals for more than 25 years, but has also worked with athletes from a variety of backgrounds and continues clinical work in disordered eating and other medical problems. Jasmine was a key advisor for Dance UK and has given talks on nutrition and dance performance and on eating disorders at various national and international conferences, as well as running courses for dance teachers. She was the nutrition consultant for the Dance UK information sheet on food and nutrition for dancers and co-author of the recently produced IADMS nutrition paper. Jasmine was also part of the original team running a course on managing eating disorders for qualified dietitians and was a council member at the British Dietetic Association for over 5 years. Professor Matthew Wyan is a professor in dance science at the University of Wolverhampton and a visiting professor at the University College London and Institute of the Arts, the Netherlands. He is the course leader for the MSc in Dance Science and the director of studies for a number of dance science medicine doctoral candidates. He is a founding partner of the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science and has been a past president of the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science. He has worked with numerous dancers and companies within the UK and Europe, and as an applied physiologist and strength and conditioning coach, his research focuses on injury epidemiology and performance enhancement in dance. Presently, he has published over 90 peer-reviewed articles in dance medicine and science. So without any further ado, I would like to pass over to Jasmine Chalice, who will be starting with her presentation on nutrition. Thank you, Jasmine.
Thanks, Erin. I will put my video on, shall I?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, let's go with that. Okay, so thank you for that very wonderful introduction. Without further ado, we're going to be thinking about the nutrition aspect of physical and mental preparation for returning to dance. Can I have the next slide, please, Erin? So if we think about COVID-specific nutrition questions, the first one has to be, are you working with any dancers who've been unwell with COVID and may still be working to resume their normal levels of health and fitness? Because they may need to focus additionally on restorative nutrition. They may have lost significant amounts of muscle. They may still be quite exhausted if they're still coughing, if they've had severe symptoms, and their physical well-being may well have taken quite a hit. If you're aware that the experiencing COVID has resulted in significant weight loss, then they may need to take time to restore that and really take part in a very gentle program when they first start coming back to dance. And I'm sure that Matt will pick up on that as well. So they are a very specific group and they may need specific advice. There is general advice on nutrition and recovery from COVID in various reliable websites. The NHS website, the British Dietetic Association will have some information. So people will be advised to find specific information about recovery, nutrition recovery from COVID before they start thinking about where are they going with their dance nutrition. Secondly, if we have that group, so that group needs to restore their nutrition, we move on to those who haven't suffered significantly from COVID or only suffered mildly but are generally well. So The second question I'll be looking at is, how has nutrition been during lockdown and as things move forward? The third area I want to look at is, should dancers consider any specific supplements for this particular time? For example, we know that vitamin D has a role to play in the immune system. And fourthly, how do dancers manage fluids with mask wearing? Because I looked at so much data on masks and dancing, and nobody had addressed the mask wearing, but we have a plan, which I will come to. So I've put some links in there as to general dance nutrition information that people might find helpful. Next slide, please, Erin. So changes to nutrition during lockdown and since. I've certainly been aware there have been articles about how people's nutrition has maybe become less focused on the fruits and veggies, less focused on what you might generally call healthy eating, and resulted, if you believe what you read in the press, in vast amounts of banana bread and bread making in general. And really not focusing so much on staying in a healthy place. So some people may have increased their nutrient intake. Some people may have had time to eat better. Some people may not have been scrabbling. Some dancers may not have been scrabbling to actually try and manage to fit the nutrition they need in a working day, and may actually have had a chance to improve their nutrition. Other people, their energy intake may have increased, but their actual nutrient intake may have reduced. So we don't know. There will be a variety within any group. The first thing is to find out, really ask people to assess where they're at, what has happened since they went into lockdown. Secondly, people's budget for food may have improved or may have reduced. I think it's highly likely with those dancers, those who've been furloughed, those who've struggled with work, that their budget for food may have reduced, and that will have impacted on their nutrition intake. I'm very aware from work over 3 decades or so that when a budget is tight, you can squeeze the budget for food to a certain extent. That doesn't mean you end up with a nutritious diet. It doesn't mean you end up meeting your requirements, but you can feed yourself on the money available, but it might be very limited in terms of what that's delivering. Anybody where the budget for food has improved, then obviously that's potentially a real positive. Then we come on to body composition. So body composition may have changed, other than those changes due to differences in training, because if you're doing potentially different training, your body composition will change gradually, and I'll leave Matt to pick up on that. But I would suggest that if people feel their body composition has changed, particularly in terms of gaining body fat that isn't helpful for them as an individual, that we're not looking for anybody to take drastic action at this stage. It would be about, first of all, meeting nutrient requirements. So getting all the vitamins and the minerals, the protein, the essential fats and adequate carbs in to be able to meet the training needs, and then reviewing what happens to body composition with the effect of training. So a very strong message that rapid, drastic action is not going to be helpful if people feel that they need to alter their body composition from a reducing body fat point of view, but also actually if people have become malnourished, again, it's not something you can change overnight. It's going to be something that needs to be addressed over the next weeks and months. And I think important for those who are overseeing training to be aware of that, and to support dancers to not try and rush things, to be able to take their time to do it in a healthy way. And finally, on these headline points, disordered eating and eating disorders may well have become more prominent in, could we go back one? Sorry. Thank you. Disordered eating and eating disorders may well have become more prominent in those already struggling with their relationships with food. Certainly in my clinical work, people who have been otherwise well, managing an eating disorder quite well under control, have struggled with the isolation, the lack of normal activity, the lack of seeing people eating normally to maybe get some feedback as to how normal eating works, and have gone backwards into quite severe eating disorders, and I'm hearing that from my colleagues as well. So I think, again, those who are overseeing training or overseeing professional dancers, overseeing managing dancers, to be really mindful that people's relationship with food may have gone backwards, and people may be struggling who either hadn't in the past or who had thought that this was a part of their past. And really to be aware, therefore, of the routes to signpost dancers locally for help, usually via their GP to start with, but being aware of local resources and also the National Eating Disorders Association, so BEAT, which is Beating Eating Disorders. So the BEAT website has a lot of useful information. Next slide, please. So thinking specifically about supplements, should dancers consider supplements at this point? Vitamin D, yes, please. We're moving towards the end of summer, and whilst people may have been outside in the sunshine, not getting burnt, but getting some important vitamin D activated by the action of sunlight on the skin, we're moving to the time of year. We've got a few more weeks when we can make our own vitamin D, and through the autumn and winter and spring, we are all recommended to take 10 micrograms on average per day, which is 400 international units. If somebody has been found to be vitamin D deficient and is on a prescription, they should continue with that. Vitamin D is needed for the immune system, but there is no evidence that more will help. There's a very nice government summary documents that you can easily find on vitamin D and COVID, where although there were some claims early on that maybe vitamin D was really important, the data that there is, the evidence there is not very robust and has confounding factors in it. So the consensus at the moment is, please take 10 micrograms per day. Please don't take more than 100 micrograms per day, which is 4,000 international units, unless it's been prescribed. And be aware that it's unlikely that more will help. Other vitamins and minerals, let's have a look at specific groups for that. So if dancers are vegan or almost vegan, then they should be taking vitamins B12. They should also be taking, in the UK, iodine. I have some interesting conversations with my colleagues overseas, because in the US and in Australia, they fortify salt routinely with iodine, and they have other fortified iodized products. We don't. You can get iodized salt, but otherwise most of our iodine comes from dairy products and from white fish. You can get it from seaweed, but that's unpredictable and not recommended to take on board large amounts of seaweed. So B12 and iodine, to think about omega-3 fatty acids, which there are vegetarian and vegan sources, some sources of nuts, some soy products, but there is still debate as to what the conversion rate is from vegetarian omega-3 fats into the types that human beings need. And most of our omega-3s come from oily fish, but they in turn get it from algal oils. So an algal oil is vegan, so from sea algae, so that is an option. Iron and calcium are major micronutrients of concern in the vegan or almost vegan diet, and there will be information on that in the One Dance UK and in the IADM's information, and fairly widely available. The Vegan Society do a supplement that has both B12 and iodine in. So for vegan dancers, if they're not taking that, I would strongly suggest they have a look at the Vegan Society website. It's a very inexpensive supplement, and take that if they don't have a good alternative already on board. And it includes vitamin D, so it means they don't have to take a separate supplement. Vegetarians, again, to be aware of iron. Calcium should be less of a concern. And in general, for dancers in general, if their intake has been limited for any reason, a general multivitamin, multimineral for a short period of time, for example, 1 to 2 months, just to replenish what might have been missed out over the last few months, while focusing on their food intake too. A supplement should never replace what's being got from food unless there's a medical reason for a limited diet. One always wants to be in a place where the diet is supplying the range of vitamins and minerals that we need, if at all possible. There are no specific COVID suggestions apart from this. The nutrients that support the immune system are copper, folate, iron, selenium, zinc, and vitamins A, B6, B12, vitamin C. So sorry for the grammar in that. I obviously did some cut and pasting and didn't tidy it up, but there is no evidence that adding in extra is a good idea. And in fact, we need 100% of what we need, and putting in 200% is not helpful by and large. It may result eventually in an overload, or it may just end up with vitamin C, for example, just being excreted in urine. With minerals, if you take a vast amount of, for example, copper, it will get in the way of iron absorption and vice versa. So if any supplement is to be taken, a general multivitamin, multimineral that's got 100% of the dietary reference value in per day would be the recommendation if it's necessary in addition to food, or if somebody's unsure if their food is actually adequate. Next slide, please. So on to the final topic, and I'd certainly be happy to take all nutrition questions, whether it's on these topics that I've covered or any others relative to returning to dance at this stage. As I said, I looked far and wide for advice on managing drinks and masks, and we've had a bit of discussion. Well, I've had a bit of discussion with a few people, including across to Australia. And the best consensus that I can come up with at the moment, and it may change with time, but this is where we're at the moment, is that obviously it is not possible to drink through a mask. So there needs to be a plan for managing this, and none of the mask wearing addresses this. So considering set drinks breaks within classes would be a reasonable idea to stop people moving across spaces randomly, and to make sure that they actually follow safe guidelines for managing masks and drinking. And it would be a good idea as well to asking dancers to set up their drinks at socially distanced intervals, because once masks are removed, obviously the risk of COVID moving across the air is going to be increased. So at that stage, you want social distancing and optimizing ventilation for times when dancers' masks are removed. It's not a time for a social chit chat in close proximity. It's a time for getting the drink in. So then comes on to the possibly tricky bit. So remove the masks or create access for drinking, reminding dancers to only touch ear elastics or ties, and to remove either one side of the mask or pull it down, or ideally remove it into a container to take home for laundry or disposable if it's not a reusable one. So the recommendation is to have a clean mask to use after every drinks break. But quite realistically, if that's going to be every 20 to 30 minutes, that's going to be a lot of masks. So it may not be practical. So that is the safest thing to do, is to have a clean mask to use after every drink break. Any other option is less good. It's still better to keep wearing the mask again afterwards, but it's not as good as replacing it with a fresh mask. And I need to be clear about that. So you could unhook one side and have it hanging down. Of course, then the area of the mask that you've been breathing on that could have potentially virus on if you're an unknown carrier, or the other side, if other people have breathed on you, may have virus on. So that then may cut your skin. So it's not a perfect situation. Equally, if you pull it down onto your chin, you're then contaminating that skin. So there is a risk of contamination if you remove your mask just to access the drink and then put it back on. We had a debate about whether it'd be better to take it off completely and maybe put it on kitchen roll on the floor, but then there's more clearing up to be done. So, there may be other ideas and I'd be happy to discuss them, but this is the most sensible that we can think of at the moment. So once you've made access for drinking to your mouth, sanitize your hands, have your drink, Then replace your mask either with a clean, dry mask, only touching the ties or elastic as far as possible, or retie, refix your existing mask, touching the face area of the mask minimally. You just need to make sure it's back over your nose and under your chin. Then, importantly, wash or sanitize your hands and then continue with dancing. So it's impossible to get away from the fact that you need access to sanitizer or hand washing twice during this procedure. And stating the obvious, dancers may need a number of masks for each day. And I think that is me, and I think I'm now handing over to Matt.
Hello everybody. As you can see, we've got an increase in beard size mainly because of lockdown. I have to go to the next slide. Excellent. So, I apologise for the noise just next to me. My dog has chosen this time to actually just have a drink. One of the big issues we're obviously trying to overcome is the whole concept of 3 to 4 months of reduced activity over this period. Some people have been able to do some activity, but often it's at a much reduced level. And so therefore this is going to have an effect on their underlying physical condition. Another hard thing is when we're coming back and trying to organise a class is that we're going to have some people who've been doing lots of exercise, some people have done little exercise, so everyone's going to be starting at quite a different point. But this is the interesting thing with the body, and one of the problems we're going to have. Our body and our mind all remembers what we could do a few months ago and thinks that we can do it again, and we probably can for the first exercise session or dance class, and then we'll pay for it afterwards. So often it's a case we're looking at is the body being able to do an intensity and be able to cope with a certain intensity of exercise, but it's what we've lost is our ability to recover, and this results in the John Wayne walk that is on the top of your screen. I'm not sure if it's, but so that's what we all should be walking like post our first class. So this can be quite hard. So again, as teachers, and how you're going to decide on how hard you can push them is going to be nearly impossible to determine until you actually have a play with the students and see how they respond to exercise. Just go to the next slide, please. So as we said, we just want to dance, and all your students will want to dance, and you'll want them to get them back to dancing, and often we'll feel there's a pressure to try and play catch up really, really quickly. But the most important thing on here is realize that we need to play this catch up, or this lost 2 or 3 months, over the next 4 to 5 months. If we go too quickly, what is going to happen is that our body's going to break and we're going to be off for even longer. So it's planning, and actually probably the main thing is going to be is holding them back, so we can do a gradual increase up into those capacities where you want them to be, or where they were just before lockdown. And it's all it is, and it is really important to ask your students, and yourself for that matter, and check on how you're feeling the next day after doing the exercise, or the day after. And that's an idea of how our body's ability to recover. So when we start getting DOMS, which is delayed onset of muscle soreness, we often experience between 12 or 24 and 48 hours afterwards. And probably the best way of checking to see how well your body's recovered is what we call technically the poke test. And you just get your finger and poke your legs, or your bottom, or your calf. And if it hurts, that means your muscle is damaged and still having time to repair. So it's going to be a longer process to actually get used to the recovery. And next slide, please. So I've split these up into those who are doing recreational dance, and also those within a vocational setting. The most important thing is, I think, most people are going to be worried about coming back and what they're not capable of, what they've forgotten technically, and so I think if you make it a nice fun environment and takes the pressure off being able to do everything perfectly, will really help for the first sort of period. I'll put down here, I think, the technique needs to be the main focus, because again, when we're starting to learn that technique or relearn the technique or reinforce that, what actually happens is we slow the intensity down. And so we should then not be exposing them to too much damage. Jumping is one of our main causes of damage, and it's mainly due to the eccentric action of the muscle when the muscle lengthens and dampens the force when we land. So if we do too much too quickly, what again is we come back down to the John Wayne walk. So I recommend start with 200 jumps a day in total at first, and we can gradually look at how we can increase that depending on how their bodies react. And that's the hardest thing, is looking at you getting feedback from them of how their bodies felt after the class, and not just what they want you to hear, but actually what it actually feels like. And that's again is that whole important thing of still making it fun and to get back to dancing. So again, adults pretty similar. The physical demands, again, I would say that they've probably experienced a larger decline than the young and adolescent dancers, and also they're going to take much longer to recover. That's one of the joys, obviously, of getting older. So I would, for them, reduce even more the number of jumps, even if you maybe just a very short period of jumps, of maybe no more than 20 to 30, maybe a maximum of 50, and just see how their bodies respond. Also for this group here, especially as they starting to get more elderly, we need to have more rest within the class as well for them to recover, just because their bodies are probably degenerated more. And I've put down there for the elderly as well, make it really, really slow, make it fun, don't put a stress on their body, and by focusing on the technique, that'll certainly help that. Okay, next slide, please. So, okay, some bit more on the recreational dancers. So we've just covered the second bit. An important aspect for the key stages 4 and 5, especially within that educational setting, is there is a focus often on strength conditioning, but within this we need to really remember the flexibility, and getting them to start putting that as their supplemental training in the evening, is having a good stretch each day to keep maintain and develop their range of motion. Now, obviously, within the educational setting, everyone works in bubbles, so we've got to work out, if we increase the frequency of classes, how we only can do that within their fixed bubble. And so we've got to work out, or you have to work out, how you can increase that frequency, but not by mixing the bubbles of the people. And that's going to obviously be a logistical aspect. So we can gradually increase the frequency of classes as long as we don't mix the bubbles. And the other thing within this is look at how we can gradually integrate conditioning. As we mentioned before, I would, in some ways, maybe set them exercises to do outside of that class, them to gradually start doing. And if you've got contact with them now before they come back to, say, the school setting, then it might be a way of saying, here, start doing these sort of exercises, start preparing yourself prior to coming back to actually doing technique class. So the thing to remember at the end of the day is just the same as you'll all know from a technical perspective. From a fitness perspective, one size doesn't fit all. Everyone's going to be in different conditions. and also that the difference of what maybe you teach. If you teach outside of a school education, like in a private school, compared with a school setting, you're going to have different bodies who require different levels of fitness and different capabilities, and not just to try and what you do in one will be appropriate for the other. So really try and think about how the bodies you deal with and in that setting, and moderate your movements appropriately. And next one, please. So for vocational setting, I would recommend emailing out to the students exercises students start doing now, especially as some summer schools are reduced, or if they are having summer schools, they are online again. So again, they're having a much lower exposure to dance activity at the moment. So again, when they come back, they're going to certainly be in much poorer physical condition than you're probably used to. So for the first week, I would look at doing no jumps at all. And I would get them to start focusing on how to jump outside of a class situation. And so this is more of a strength conditioning sort of approach, when we might just look at doing small jumps and practicing landing slowly into a plie, focused on alignment, getting into skipping, lunges, calf raises, and some core training as a supplemental training, not part as a technique. And so they're actually focusing on these sort of areas outside of the ballet class. In week 2, we could probably move to 2 classes a day. Again, limit jumps to maybe 1 class. So don't do suddenly jump from only 1 class a day to suddenly 2 classes with jumps. And so again, it's a lot of this is going to be, as I use that technical term, suck it and see how their bodies respond to incorporating jumps. If the next day they're all feeling really sore, then maybe you might start doing jumps every other day, or just twice a week. So the most important thing on this is thinking of a long-term development. If we all rush back and put too much of a load on the body, then it's just going to break. And so that means we might have 2 weeks of classes, and then we end up with a load of dancers who are broken and they can't do class. So the important thing is it's safer to be sorry, right? It's safer to be slow than go too quickly and be sorry for some patients in the long term. So the idea of this sort of the breakdown is just a real gradual increase in loading and seeing how they respond to that loading and adapt accordingly. And you can see there by week 5, week 6, we're looking at 2 to 3 classes a day, jumps in classes one day, maybe only 1 the following day. So you're trying to again gradually increase the load. Out of all sort of dance activity, it's jumping which causes the most damage, muscular damage, should I say. And so we want their body to get used to that ability to recover. And obviously within that requires good food, as Jasmine has covered, and rest is the other important thing. So when we exercise, our bodies adapt post-exercise. We're a reactive mechanism, and we need rest to actually for the body to heal itself. So if I start exercising again when I should be resting, then actually I don't allow my body to recover fully, and so it carries on in a state of being broken. Okay, and next slide, please. So if we charge in too quickly, we get broken dancers. So the rush to catch up will just result in more delays. We need to look at how we can lengthen that catch-up period as much as possible. And the hardest thing is we can put the best of practices in place now, remotely, but also realize that as soon as we get to start working with the dancers, we don't know how they're going to respond. And also the hardest thing is you might find within that school setting or within any sort of dance studio setting, one group may respond totally differently from the next group. And so again, you've got to maybe have a different approach for every group of dancers you're working with. And again, suck it and see. It's better to start cautiously and actually be overly cautious to actually end up with the result that you want to. Again, how do we work out how well they're actually responding to this? Look at how they're moving. If they can't go as far down in a plie as they had the day before, it's because of the muscle damage and the body's not coping. So maybe you need to back off a bit. That's probably the easiest way to go, rather than going around and poking all the dancers and see if they say ow. That's probably not the best of the things to do. So it's really looking at how well, how have they been able to lift their leg in développé as high as they did the day before. If they're not, it's the body not being able, is still being recovering. So we've got to maybe back off again. And the other thing I would like to say is a hard class doesn't need to be a physically hard class. It can be a technically hard class without putting a lot of force on the body. So maybe again use that creativity that you've got in spades to really work out how you can make dance classes tough, technically tough, but physically easy, and gradually challenge in that way. Dancers want to dance and they want to get back and they want to catch up, and your job is to try and rein it in. And they're taking that rein it in to slightly further into the horse category, going from walk to trot to canter. And the most important thing is if it's a fun environment, then they'll be more likely to cope better with their inadequacies or with their thinking, oh my God, I used to be so much better. So be open about it. Tell them end of the day, it's going to take a while to catch up. Don't expect to be able to do everything perfectly straight away. And let them know that you have a plan, how you're going to get them back to where they were and where they should be by maybe a certain time like Christmas or just after, so they know not to worry about where they need to go. Is that my last one? I think it might be. Yes.
So thank you, Matt, and thank you, Jasmine. And that was a really wonderful presentation. And I think we can take any questions now from anyone in the attendee group. And we had one question to start out with, and the question was about mask wearing for exercise classes and indoor exercise. And the question was that EMD have advised against wearing masks for exercise class, and the government have updated this on their site saying masks are not required for indoor exercise if it affects your ability to do the activity. And the question was whether or not we would recommend we still wear masks for dance, even though there might be a social distance of up to 3 meters. And the answer on that question is that it depends on the setting. If it's in a school setting, the full school guidance says that teachers don't need to wear masks. Also, if you're working in a school, you need to remember that you need to follow the school MAT policy on this. Furthermore, the full school's guidance states that Public Health England does not, based on current evidence, recommend the use of face coverings in schools. The evidence is going to be kept under review, and they do not require schools, as people and staff are mixing in consistent groups, and because misuse may inadvertently increase the risk of transmission. There may also be negative effects on communication and thus education. The out of school setting doesn't mention face coverings, but it does mention PPE. And it's also key if you are going to be using the out of schools guidance for any of your activity that you go and review that information about PPE. But it's only really needed in a very small number of cases. And the out of school setting guidance is only valid until the end of summer holidays, and it's anticipated that this may be updated. So hopefully that helps with that question particularly. But Matt and Jasmine, what are your thoughts in terms of mask wearing in terms of exercise? I know that we've covered this a bit already.
I've already logged in something there, actually. So I was just, if you look down, there's an absolute, I don't know if Matt's seen it, an absolutely fantastic podcast from the Dance Docs. It's about an hour long. They're based in the US on on actual mask wearing and practicalities about choosing suitable masks when masks are necessary, because I think we've already had those discussions that there are going to be times for adults where they are necessary. But I mean, and Matt will no doubt pick up, there was actually discussion about the benefits and the training effects of wearing a mask. Obviously, if you have medical conditions, there may be reasons not to wear a mask, but the fact that actually it can improve one's cardiovascular abilities or the lung function perhaps better. But I'll pass that one over to Matt.
I think for the majority of dance class, we're not at an intensity that wearing a mask is going to actually affect your breathing dynamics at all. And it's only when we sort of come to the higher intensity aspects of it that there's the potential that breathing dynamics is going to be affected negatively. And that often depends on the mask you're wearing as well. And I found actually the disposable masks that you can get, those little paper sort of things, actually you breathe through much easier than some of the more heavy duty cloth ones. And so it's maybe selecting that right mask. And a lot of, so from a pure sort of physiological perspective, it's not going to affect your airflow or oxygen availability at all, but you might feel that it does. And that's the biggest thing. And if you think about it, actually the last time this came up, a friend messaged me afterwards, Daniel Jones, who used to dance at EMP, and just reminded me that if you think about the amount of cyclists, choreographers who zoom through London wearing those full-on face masks, and they go at seriously high intensity and doesn't affect their ability to actually breathe. So from a pure physiological perspective, I don't think face masks will have a major influence. But again, if there's medical reasons, that overrides my sort of advice from a physiological perspective, and just to take that into account.
Yeah, and just to reiterate kind of what we started talking about at the beginning of the session, which is that it's really important to stay up to date on what the government guidance says, because it does change regularly in terms of what they're requiring or not requiring in different settings. So it's always good to stay up to date on that. I had a question for you, Jasmine, actually, in terms of the practicalities of eating in a studio space. And I wonder if you have any sort of suggestions or thoughts for people who might be needing to consume or take in energy during a dancing session or during a dancing day, whether that's a teacher or a student. What are some of the practicalities that people need to be thinking about with that?
Thanks, great question. I think firstly, food safety has to be paramount, so that if you're taking in particularly the protein-rich foods, whether that be eggs, fish, meat, the vegetarian sources are a little safer, but you still don't want things getting to the kind of temperatures, particularly that we've had this week, but anything above about 4 degrees, bacteria start multiplying. So first of all, get yourself a really good cool bag or a really good flask, so that cold food can be kept cold and hot food can be kept hot to prevent bugs multiplying. Then potentially after that, thinking about what you're going to need. So energy as well as protein. So are you going to be able to get in some sources of protein in a way that's going to be easy to manage, isn't going to make a huge mess, is going to be really, really practical and enjoyable as well. And just a very practical point, if you're going to have a load of really salty food, it's likely to make you more thirsty. If you are in a situation that requires you to drink in a mask and you're getting even more thirsty, that's going to increase your fluid requirements for the body to process the salt. So thinking globally, thinking about your normal dance food and how do you adapt that safely, but also make it really practical, and ensure that you maybe even do a trial run, do a packed lunch at home. You know, have you got all the cutlery that you need? Do you need some kitchen rolls, serviettes, wipes, something? You know, what do you need to actually make it work?
Yeah, I think that those are really good pointers, and thinking about the kinds of foods you might bring and trying them out, even just the day before that you might be going. What about things like hygiene in terms of frequency of hand washing? What about that in terms of eating? Is it a sort of before and after kind of a thing, or is it quite simple?
Yeah, I mean, you'd normally go for wash your hands before eating under every situation. You know, that applies to all human beings under any setting, unless it's not possible. It is best practice, that's for sure. So ideally washing hands to remove dirt, because you don't necessarily want to be eating anything that's got onto your hands. So there's the cleaning bit, and then the sanitizing, which we've talked about in other podcasts. But before eating, they need to be clean. They don't need to be sanitized, but they need to be clean. But then to restart dancing, they need to be clean and sanitized. So you don't want to be trying to sanitize hands that have got, I don't know, bits of tomato, banana, bread, whatever on them, or bits or loads of saliva. So it's going to be wash before you eat, wash and sanitize when you're finished.
Yeah. And I suppose, Matt, I had a question in terms of the gradual increase in physical activity, because we've been running a HDP online session, which is about jump maintenance. And so I know that a lot of dancers are doing some quite intensive physical conditioning right now in lockdown, perhaps even more intensive than what they were doing while they were training, because they have a bit more time. So what would you say about that in terms of kind of the return to dance activity in a studio? Are they fit now to be able to go back completely to dancing? Is that, you know, are they up for their normal activities, or what are the considerations they need to make?
I think the biggest thing that they're not used to is, you know, that training with Jason is being quite short and sharp, high intensity but short and sharp, and the opposite of what dance exposure usually is, which is long hours of low to moderate intensity, and that's a different stress on the body, and that's what their bodies aren't going to be used to. So that's that thing they need to gradually expose their body to, is those longer hours of low to moderate exercise, and that can be just as tiring as a 30-minute eyes out on stalks, lungs as earmuffs, training session, but it doesn't transpose. So that being used to that does not then say, oh, okay, I can now then cope with 4 hours of low-level exercise. It's a whole different. It's not a cardiorespiratory to your lungs and your heart and your, the demand you'll be able to cope with, but it's not, you won't be able to cope with so well with that low level exposure. So your muscles are going to be really, really tired. They're going to have just as much damage from that, and it's getting used to that sort of thing. So don't go from, yes, I've done my green goddess workout and then also my Jason workout, and then I can suddenly do 4 hours of dancing. That won't have that same transference.
And this is a little bit of a kind of both of you question, I suppose. So I'm aware for young people now that the opportunity to eat at places like McDonald's is now open to them again. And so I wondered if you could both come in a little bit on quality of nutrition and how that impacts training. So kind of what kinds of quality choices should they be making in terms of food, Jasmine, these young people? And Matt, kind of what are the impacts of eating different kinds of energy sources, and how might that affect their training? You know, how would eating a big McDonald's before they go into dance class potentially affect them?
Okay, shall I go first on that
yes,
one?
You can go first, yes.
You can gather your thoughts, Matt. I mean, it's the same as it always is, isn't it? And that you need to think about how you're going to meet your nutrition requirements. And the problem with fast foods is not so much what they are as what they aren't, in that you can get a decent source of protein, but the bread is highly refined. Yeah, it might have some vitamins added to it, but it's not going to be the same as having some whole grain bread. And the biggest thing that's missing if you have your McDonald's, Burger King, whatever, is the vegetables component, the fruit and vegetables component. So you can get in some Macronutrients, you're getting some protein, you're getting some carbs and fat. Depending on your choice, it might be quite high fat, it might not be. If it is high fat, it's going to take much longer to digest. And Matt can talk further to that, I'm sure, but you're going to feel really uncomfortable. But if you go for a high fat meal and you're not used to it, it's not going to go well. And so there's an issue about volume, there's an issue of what you're not getting, how are you going to get in the range of nutrients from fruits and veggies if the meal doesn't supply any. So you really need to go and look for that. Then if you're doing it too regularly, you're limiting the variety of nutrients that you're going to get. So it's really thinking about what you would normally do, and also the fact that, actually coming back to dance, one brief extra point is that some people find they really have to adjust their intake when they come back. Their appetite doesn't do it normally. So if your workload goes up, your energy requirement needs to go up to match that. And it may happen automatically, or you may have to consciously do that. And if you've got less time, you're back into that whole, have I got time to eat? So planning for going back is really important. And with that, I'll hand over to Matt.
Yeah, eating and exercise always is interesting. It's also what you're used to doing. Generally, if you eat too close to exercise, the body wants to get rid of it. A third of your blood supply goes to digest your food, and if you need that blood supply elsewhere, it needs to leave the body and goes out as either diarrhea or as vomit. If your body really needs to get rid of it. And yeah, so generally avoid a big meal just prior to exercise, as it becomes messy. And especially if the loos are shut in the place where you're exercising as well, that causes even more issues. And so I think, as Jasmine says, it's no different from what it is before. I know it's been exciting, that you were denied your fast food for 2 to 3 months, and now it's back on the menu, or availability. And you can probably gorge yourself for a couple of sessions and hopefully get it out of your system, and then avoid it like the plague. But don't eat a big meal just prior to exercise, and especially a big meal with high fat content, as Jasmine said. The digestion takes longer. So yeah, it's looking at your usual choice of what to eat and when, and stuff that's easily digestible, that is the right macronutrient supply of energy. It's going to be released in the manner. So again, what you eat half an hour before a class isn't going to have any effect on you for energy during the class, unless it's really simple sugars, and then you're just as likely to cause yourself to have a sugar low when you want to have access to that energy. So it's not being just implementing what you've done pre-lockdown, as you should carry on now and overcome your to need to increase the profit margins of our fast food outlets.
Wonderful. Thank you guys both for that. That's really good collaborative work there. And I think it's also really important for everyone to understand that there is a lot of collaborative work between professionals like Jasmine and Matt in terms of people who are doing intensive activities or any activity really. And so if you do have students or participants or dancers who are needing help with their physical fitness or with their nutrition, it's key to remember that it's useful to have input from both sides in terms of dietitians and nutritionists, as well as physiologists and strength and conditioning coaches. So thank you guys for your input on this session. It's been really fascinating and excellent to hear your input. And I'm just going to share my screen one more time and talk about the last of the Return to Dance sessions. So we have 2 more Return to Dance sessions that are going to be next week, and it will be the last in this series before September. So we have one on Wednesday, the 19th of October, which will focus on COVID-19 vulnerability and equality and diversity. We'll be reviewing the government guidance on equality and diversity and vulnerability in that session. We will then have a subsequent session on Thursday the 20th from 10 a.m. to noon, which will focus on vulnerability to COVID-19, equality and diversity, and hear from voices from the sector in terms of the implications of vulnerability in terms of COVID-19 and how that has been experienced on individuals returning to dance. So hopefully people will be able to join us for those sessions. In the meantime, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful weekend, and thank you again for your time today. Take care, everyone.